So, traditional Jewish, Christian, or Muslim. To understand.
Atheist and agnostic as well as many types.
This is a closed set. I don't know what the fuck that means.
It means nobody else is supposed to be on set.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, everyone, this is a very fancy operation. We're on a closed live set.
The extra living room.
We called the family room.
That's fair.
Yeah. Only because that's what my parents called distinctive. Their two living rooms.
The living room that doesn't have a TV is the family room.
Well, their family room did have a TV, and I want both of ours to have a TV.
Sure. I don't know. That was the distinction for the one family home that I specifically remember that had two different sitting rooms, one with a TV and one without. There was the living room, which was directly connected to the kitchen and dining. Well, the casual kitchen dining space. And then there was the formal dining room,
right,
and which was the other side of the kitchen.
Yes,
then the family room beyond that with no TV.
So our dining room was the formal dining room, and then the living room was the formal living room. And then there's family room, which is casual, and kitchen, which was eaten. So that was anyway. This has literally nothing to do with what we're talking about today. So, you know what's even more confusing than our living situation?
What's that?
Rosicrucianism. On today's episode of
the Holy Watermelon Podcast. It was a bit to study. There was a lot of things that I read that I thought was really cool that I didn't get a good enough grip on to put into the notes.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk through a lot, because even when you walked in today, I was like, I get it, but I couldn't put it into words. So I think we'll just hopefully talk through a lot of it. But Rosicrucianism is, in essence, Christian mysticism.
Yeah.
So we talked about Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, and ding, 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 guess what's next week? Our next episode, rather, is going to be Muslim mysticism, Islamic mysticism. So Sufism is actually what it's called. But we're going to start with Rosicrucianism, which is all kind of made up, but also exists.
It's a special sort of thing that it's all built on older ideas and built in a new thing. And even though Christianity is newer than Judaism, predates Islam in any meaningful way, Rosicrucianism does not predate Sufi tradition.
It took a while for the mysticism to show up.
It took a while for this particular kind of Christian mysticism
I guess
to show up.
Gnosticism is earlier.
Yeah, there's a lot of different kinds of Christian mysticism that didn't last very long and are poorly documented. Great book I have on my shelf that I got years ago when I was in university is Lost Christianities by Bart Ehrman. Good book.
Read that you put it in your notes, and I like Bart Ehrman's writing, so I might have to borrow that from you.
For sure.
Yeah.
Earliest days of Christianity, within the first decade after Jesus died, and missionaries were going around spreading the good news, people were mashing their ideas of cosmology and theology into what they were given of Christianity. And that lasted for a while until the Catholic Church identified itself and started stomping out those fires.
Yeah, they like to do that.
Heresy is the word they used. Anything that wasn't officially approved by church leadership was heresy. And mysticism always fell into that.
And even to some extent still does, but it's Christianity. Man, could you imagine if these people saw Christianity today?
I know for sure that if the early apostles saw what is going on as everything that identifies itself as Christian in the world today, tears would be shed.
I was going to say they would crucify themselves.
That may be.
I don't want to live on this planet anymore.
Luckily, Rosicrucianism in some groups, again, restate this as often as we possibly can, definitely have to this time, nothing is monolithic. So even when we talk about Rosicrucianism, there's a lot of groups that believe a lot of different things, but there is some overlap that makes them Rosicrucian.
Yeah, so the approved mysteries of the Catholic Church were pretty strictly limited to the sacraments and the paschal sacrifice of Christ. Did I say that word right?
Pascal?
Yeah.
Close. So Pascal is a person's name,
Right,
but it is derived from the Passion
I
of
wasn't-
Passover.
or is it paschal?
Pascal.
Like school.
Pascal.
Okay, so I said it right.
Oh, so you said Pascal.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Words Guy.
No problem. So mysteries in the classical sense familiar to occultic mystery schools were entirely forbidden. It was that mystery stuff. If you had secrets that you weren't allowed to share with your priest, that was going to be a problem for you. Obviously, it came from the devil.
Yeah, this is such a weird one because it is all of this occult stuff that they tell Christians not to do.
Yeah. And by they, we mean church authorities.
But most, yeah, church, but most even in modern day Protestantism, they'll tell you that Harry Potter's of the devil for literally the reasons we're about to talk
because they talk about magic. If your faith stops you from enjoying fiction, that's going to be trouble.
Yeah, you're missing out on a lot in life. But
Mysticism, broad, interesting thing. Mystics tend to be more concerned about learning how everything works than the average person, especially thousands of years ago when we see it pop up in Judaism. This is a lot of where your scientists are. I mean, yeah, sure, your priests are the literate ones for a lot of history. They would be your doctors and teachers as well. But scientists, your alchemists, really good concrete example, are mystics looking at science. And sure, they might have hypotheses that don't pan out. Turning lead into gold is something that takes an awful lot of energy.
one idea that I kind of want to put into our heads now, and maybe we don't
Mhm.
answer it until the end of next episode,
Could be.
is it's interesting to me, the mystic traditions, and like it all just comes back and feels the same, right? Like
They're very similar.
This is just like a step before. This is so slightly different from New Age, right? And this is so
Yes.
slightly different, obviously, from Kabbalah. And then it's only slightly different from Hinduism. Like, part of me feels like they come to this lowest common denominator every time. And actually, our good friend Mina sent me something today. And honestly, I'll find it. She sent me something on this guy and his belief system, and he was a Christian fellow. And I was like, this is basically Hinduism. Baruch Spinoza was a Dutch philosopher with a pantheistic view that God and nature are the same thing. He rejected the idea of free will, argued that events, personal or cosmic, are part of a natural order. Things that we perceive as random are just or simply nature unfolding as it's meant to.
Nature's chaotic and mysterious.
Yeah, so
Sure.
like even that, I thought it was very interesting, and it feels like it all comes down to a common denominator.
We haven't really spent a lot of time focusing on Calvinism, where everything is basically predetermined. God has decided ages ago what's going to happen, and we just play it through. Saved or damned or whatever is going on, good or bad. It's all part of the program. I don't like looking at my life that way. I really prefer to have some agency.
Yeah, me too. But yeah, so I just want to put that in everyone's head, our listeners' head, your head, as we learn more about this, and then the next one, and then maybe do have to squeeze in an episode on Calvinism.
Yeah.
All right.
Mystics tend to be scientists of maybe a questionable nature. For example, astrology and astronomy, very different. Astrology, not very scientific. Many have spent an awful lot of time chasing some really interesting ideas, I think. They're definitely interesting to read about. Some of these weird ideas may not be very useful in the real world as far as scientific application goes. But I think it's really interesting to see how some of these build symbolic languages that are useful for communicating with your in-group.
Yeah. That's all religion is at the end of the day.
Pretty much. The problem comes up when you start, like numerology, we've talked about this before. If you read numerology into things that were not written with numerology in mind, you're going to have a bad time.
So Rosicrucianism has historically been connected to Protestantism, particularly to Lutheranism. It is an intersection of Christian mysticism and Hermetic philosophy. But you did all this historical, air
Yeah.
quotes, research.
There's an interesting story behind the Rosicrucian movement. So I'll share it with you the way I understand it. Keep it brief. So, a Rosicrucian brotherhood was described in a series of pamphlets published in Germany in the early 1600s. Allegedly, the brotherhood was founded in 1408 by a former monk named Christian Rosenkreuz. Rosenkreuz being,
The
it
Rose
is
Cross.
Rosicrucian.
Yeah.
But
Christian
German.
Rose Cross. That's pretty on the nose.
It really is. But people
All right.
name their kids Christian today, so sure. But yes, very much right on the nose. Allegedly, Rosenkreuz was initiated into a magical Arabian tradition. It wasn't in these pamphlets named Sufi outright. I feel like that's probably because that wasn't a familiar word. But if you say Arabian magic,
Oh.
that's mysterious and it catches your attention. It's exotic.
Arabian Nights.
And that exact
Imagery.
exotic appreciation made Aladdin a very popular cartoon in the 90s.
Absolutely. It was my brother's favorite. He'd never admit it now, but he watched it every day when he was a kid.
Sure.
Yep.
So while Rosenkreuz was traveling around Africa and the Near East, he got initiated into these mysteries. And this Rosenkreuz is credited with realizing that the ideal faith opposed the papal episcopal structure of the Catholic Church and included principles like alchemy and astrology. That these sciences that are still being freshly explored must mean something in the big scheme of things. Studying the sky, as above, so below. So the alchemical dream of making gold was not at all important to these people that started following him because he collected followers. But making gold was a natural byproduct of the great work, the magnum opus of alchemy that was accomplished by the greatest philosophers. The average person couldn't do that. Too much energy is required. So studying the world to find out how it works was the best way to understand God. That makes pretty good sense. It's easy to see the value that somebody might put in that. The devil's in the details, I guess. So scholars agree that Rosenkreuz only existed in the pamphlets and that he was not a real person. It's what we call a mythological figure that is just fiction.
Like Hermes Trismegistus?
Yeah, exactly like Hermes Trismegistus.
Jesus?
See, there's a
Okay,
lot of
I
argument
know.
on that.
I know. I'm being controversial.
So this brotherhood was supposed to meet annually. Like any well-governed society, you must have your AGM. They would keep their meetings secret at a place that was named, but not a name that anybody would be able, like, if you're an outsider, you wouldn't know that that's this place.
Right.
That sort of thing. So they would share their inventions with the idea of serving humanity. This was really important to them. And they were committed to curing the sick without asking for payment. And every member of the order was supposed to find an apprentice to take his spot when he died. So theoretically, the group wasn't meant to grow. They would just sit their happy, healthy number and wait in the shadows for the reformation of the Catholic Church and preserve those secrets until the time was right in the early 1600s.
I kind of like this idea. This sounds like a really good, movie.
Yeah, they called it The Phantom Menace.
Oh.
Came out in 1999. Ewan McGregor, Liam Neeson.
I mean, I remember that. Is that
Star Wars?
Yeah, well, no, I know it's Star Wars. Thank you. But I was like, I don't remember the plot enough to be like, it's Rosicrucianism.
Well, so the original Star Wars trilogy was all about the Vietnam War and how America is the empire.
Uh-huh.
And the prequels are much more nuanced. There's a lot more layers, there's a lot more things going on in the mythology. But you have this group of people who are pushed aside as a religious minority, and they have just decided at the time of the Phantom Menace, it's time for us to make ourselves known and stir the pot. And that's maybe a little bit of what we see here.
Okay. Fascinating.
So, like Rosencreuz, it's believed that the Rosicrucians probably did not have an actual secret society. These pamphlets were inspirational to a lot of people, but what they described
Never.
doesn't seem to have existed at the time of the description.
That's where this was like, this is the start of like wrapping your head around it. Well, like the Rosicrucians didn't exist, but they exist because we created
Because somebody
them.
made them exist.
Which, that's everything.
That's
I
how
mean,
things work.
But it's not the. Yeah, it's like people create it based on a story, but that's how everything's created. But it's just,
It's a wee bit frustrating.
it's weird. I know, because I like can't explain the nuance, but it's there.
Mhm.
Of like, we made it because someone wrote a book about it. Essentially,
Yeah,
that's like Jediism today.
pretty much.
Speaking of,
Somebody
it doesn't exist, but because someone wrote it into existence.
Yeah. Somebody saw a thing and said, I like looking at the world through this lens. It works for me. I'm going to teach more people how I understand how this works.
Thereby creating Rosicrucianism.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's funny. It's neat.
Yeah. So these pamphlets were first published anonymously in 1614, inviting the elites of Europe, scholars and princes, most people with power and money, to support the Rosicrucian Brotherhood, or even better, join it if you could find somebody who belonged to it. So the atmosphere that this is all happening in, the Protestant movement is still fresh. Lutheranism's been around for about 50, 60 years.
Oh, wow. Very
something
baby.
like that. And more groups are saying, hey, this Catholic Church is not working out for me. You got the Anabaptists, you got the Church of England. All these things had popped up fairly recently. And so now people are going, well, mysticism and the occult are fashionable. Let's try this.
Yeah, I wonder how much of this too is just people like, oh, now we get to control our own religion. Like we've never had this freedom before.
Mm-hmm.
How far can we push it?
Sure, yeah. And lots of groups popped up, and some survived, others didn't. That's the way that goes. So there's three important pamphlets. The first that came out in 1614 that started all of this talk about the Rosy Cross was The Fame of the Brotherhood of RC. Rosicrucianism, Rosencreuz, Rosy Cross, whatever. The Fame of the Brotherhood of RC, 1614. The next year we got the Confession of the Brotherhood of RC. And we can't say for sure who wrote these two, but fingers have been pointed. We'll get to that. And then the third one, 2 years later in 1617, we get The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz, anno 1459. So, different style of title. This one has a date attached to it to make things sound 100 years older than they are.
Yeah. They wouldn't do that.
Well, I feel like we talked about this a little bit in our last episode about Kabbalah, that there's an authority that comes with old things.
Right.
And people really love that kind of authority. So if you want something to catch on, more and more today you'll see people saying, oh yeah, this is the way I look at the world. Doesn't it make sense? And hope that it's good on its own merits. But it's just so much better if you can say, these old people you've never heard of, they also believed it. They'll back me up because they're dead.
Wow. Is that all you need is a dead person to back you up? What?
History says yes.
All right. So we have Johann Valentine Andrea.
He's an interesting fellow.
Yeah. It is broadly expected that he also wrote, so he wrote the third one, but suspected that he wrote the first two.
He says he wrote the third one. And that's probably true. It's hard to prove. But yeah, he probably wrote the third one. And because he says he wrote the third one, people also think that he wrote the first two.
But he denies it.
He denies writing the first two. So it's complicated. More complicated than you want it to be.
Right.
It could be simple. Take it at face value, easy enough. But there's a lot of doubt.
Mm-hmm. In his autobiography, Johann called his chemical romance a youthful literary trifle, intended to be a parody or satire of the popularity of such esoteric brotherhoods.
Religious parody can be a lot of fun. Religious satire, I feel like there's been a lot of political satire in the Facebook realm and social media at large for years. Maybe as long as social media has really been a thing. And a lot of people don't get that it's political satire. They just go, well, yeah, this represents me, jumping on board. This is definitely happening with this Rosenkreuz situation.
That's funny. His later writings also belittle alchemy and astrology, as well as this third pamphlet. And a Catholic encyclopedia claims that the Rose and Cross were elements of heraldic achievement in Johann Andrea's family, as well as an allusion to some words attributed to Martin Luther. Signs are pointing to this guy.
I can't remember if it was a Catholic encyclopedia or somewhere else I was reading. There's a lot of people who insist that he was a true believer, and that's why he wrote these pamphlets, but then was pressured to denounce them by the church so that he could continue on as a Lutheran theologian.
Because, as always, occult is frowned upon in Christianity. So you can believe it, but you probably don't want your name attached to it.
Yeah. But he did say in his own published autobiography that he did write the third one as a satire. Did he actually write it? I don't know. That could have been a whole elaborate ruse just to discredit the whole thing. We don't know.
Yeah, so we don't know the origin of these. We don't know if they were serious or not serious, but people genuinely were interested in the ideas, and that's why Rosicrucianism persists today. Again, created in a really weird way, and I'm into it.
Right. It's certainly novel. It's an interesting story. Yeah.
Google it. We'll throw it in our Discord. There's a few Rosicrucian crosses. The most simple one is a cross and a rose. There are some way more like occulty ones with symbols and stuff.
The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn
has a wild one.
It's so complicated. There's so many symbols in their main symbol.
I know, and I started like reading the symbolism. I was like, but this isn't even like the main. Like now they are main Rosicrucian group, but no, that one shut down.
Yeah, that one shut down.
So I was like, am I going to explain all these details for one branch of Rosicrucian? And I was like, no, I'm not. So go check it out. But the main simple cross and rose, the cross represents suffering, of course.
Makes sense.
The rose represents like blooming or thriving. So the juxtaposition of the two. And then there's other ones I've read on like the layers in the rose and like how many petals there are. Like,
yeah,
you can go really deep if you want, but because there's so many rose crosses, I was like, I'm not. We'll cover the basics. If you want more, send us a message. We'll do a bonus episode on it.
For the people who are into intricate symbolism, when they build the symbols, then they'll count how many petals and whatever. For some people, it's just the simple,
rose
obvious. Yeah. The rose paired with the cross has been a symbol for at least 500 years. We've first seen in things that we still have available to us today in about 1530. It's not original to the Rosicrucian tradition, but it's a thing.
Yeah. So, from a belief standpoint, as I mentioned at the top of the episode, Rosicrucianism is this weird intersection of esotericism and Christianity. So, there's Hermeticism in there, Christianity, occult. Again, go listen to our cursed occult episode if you're unclear on that term, but it doesn't mean bad, it just means hidden.
Secret knowledge.
Secret knowledge, that's all occult is. Rosicrucianism emphasizes the as above, so below concept, that there is a connection between the heavens and the earth, the macro and the micro. And Preston kind of talked about alchemy, but not turning lead into gold. They take that as a metaphor of the transmutation of the soul.
That's the only value I personally find in alchemy.
I mean, yeah, it's really, really hard to transform lead into gold, but maybe it's really hard to transform your soul. I don't know.
We could see it in our lifetime. We've done some wild things with the atom.
That's true.
But it has proven to be complicated to build a specific element from a different element, and takes a lot of energy.
Well, that's why alchemy is a metaphor for inner spiritual enlightenment.
Yep.
It takes a lot of energy.
I love it.
For them, the philosopher's stone is Christ. The person's soul can be transformed by it being the Christ.
Hard to argue with that.
Yeah, it's kind of neat. In Hermetic alchemy, there's 7 steps to transform metal into gold. And in Rosicrucianism, there's 7 steps to bring your soul to enlightenment.
I like it.
Rosicrucians also use sacred geometry and astrology to understand the divine at a deeper level. So they believe that God gave us secret knowledge to understand spirituality, the divine, God, better. So in one of their writings, it says, God hath already sent before certain messengers, which should testify his will, to wit, some new stars which have appeared in Serpentarius and Cygnus, the which signify and gives themselves to be known to everyone, and are books and writings of our Francis Rosicrucian, and are testaments which the Lord God hath laid open and made manifest to everyone. So if you look to the stars, God has a message for you.
You just gotta learn how to read it.
Yeah.
I like it. It's hard to put a whole lot of extra meaning onto it. If the message is the universe is huge and complicated, and maybe you don't need to sweat the small stuff, that's a message I find in the stars. But if it's like sacrifice virgins in the volcano, you're reading the stars wrong.
Maybe you're reading the stars wrong, Preston. How do you know? It's secret knowledge. How do you know if you're right or wrong?
That's the
Unless
trick.
you have a master before you from the 1600s,
Who
1400s,
can teach me how to read the
who's
stars.
told you how to read the stars. You don't
How
know.
do I know I'm getting a personal message from the same stars that everyone else is seeing?
I don't know. This is why I'm an atheist.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so that's kind of it. They use occult practices to understand Jesus, which is very counter to what the Bible says, but I'm into it.
I mean, the Bible doesn't say don't use weird science.
I'm pretty
to
sure it
understand Jesus.
says, the Bible says do not use the occult. I'm Googling it.
Okay.
Because I'm pretty sure it says, like, directly.
That'd be a lot of problems for a lot of people.
For rebellion is as the sin of divination, and presumption is as iniquity and idolatry.
So divination, it would be like reading tea leaves or dominoes or bones or rune stones. I can't argue with that.
Yeah. And he burned his sons as an offering in the valley of the sons of Hinnom, and used fortune-telling and omens and sorcery, and dealt with mediums and with necromancers. He did much evil in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger. They talk a lot about, the one I remember is, do not turn to mediums or necromancers, do not seek them out, and so make yourselves unclean by them. I am the Lord your God.
Scrying with the bodies of the dead is a wild practice.
So they talk a lot about fortune telling in the Bible, which I would say this goes under.
I don't know if it's the same as fortune telling, but
They're the
it's
same medium as fortune telling, though, right? You're not just because you're not
because it's not a concrete thing and it's totally open to interpretation.
Right.
That's definitely wildly inconsistent. That's the problem. I
I
think.
think my point is that, and I mean, it's all made up, so really, whatever.
That's the
I
thing.
literally think this is all made up, so me having an opinion is kind of ridiculous. But like,
No, not at all.
if you're using tarot
Hmm.
to understand Jesus better, it's the same medium as fortune telling.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So how do you know? It's like when people tell you they have a gift from God, and it's like that when they're like, I have the gift of discernment, and then some people will be like, well, but the devil's whispering in your ear. How do you know it's God telling you something or the devil telling you something? Same.
Sure.
The line between fortune telling and like figuring out Jesus is so fine.
So I like this tarot example, and we'll talk more about tarot later on. If you're just throwing cards around and hoping that you're going to learn about Jesus, you're going to have a bad time. But if somebody puts a lot of work into a deck of cards, into the artwork to make it full of rich symbolism, and then explains that symbolism to a student, then that seems like a perfectly reasonable way of teaching and learning from
Okay.
with the tool of the tarot.
Okay.
However, that is not something that is terribly useful when done in isolation.
Which is why you need your Rosicrucian master to the apprentice.
Yeah. Generally, any tradition loses its value when it's not communicated effectively from one to the next.
Right. Leaky bucket.
Sure. You're going to lose some stuff.
Every time.
And maybe that stuff is like super important to understand the whole thing.
Right. What if you were like adopted as an apprentice in the Rosicrucianism Brotherhood,
Mm-hmm.
and then your master died immediately, and then you'd be like there at this table once a year, being like, "What the fuck?"
So, because we're now speculating on a fiction, I feel very comfortable on saying what I would expect in this situation. Of if I have just adopted an apprentice into this philosophy, religious tradition, I wouldn't tell him when and where the meetings are until he's learned enough to be useful.
But what if you didn't know you were gonna die? Like, what if you were hit by a horse cart?
Yeah, he's not going to know about when and where the meetings are
Alright.
until he knows enough to be useful.
So now your spot's gone.
Yeah,
All
that
right.
sucks.
Sucks to suck. All right.
So after Freemasonry had spread rapidly around the world in the early 1700s, and it spread very quickly once it became an established Grand Lodge system and bringing in all the nobles from all over the place, there was countless additional degrees offered. It was a system of a couple of degrees, and then it became fairly rigidly formed into the 3 that is familiar today. And then everybody's like, well, we've got more. And so huge numbers of extra degrees produced under myriad motivations. Sometimes just, hey, here's something I wrote, give me some money and you can be part of it. Unfortunately, that's the reality of how things go sometimes. And these are all enjoyed by who knows how many thousands of people who are either looking for entertainment or enlightenment, or a mix of the two. The mid-1700s saw Rosicrucian themes and titles join the party. So the ancient and accepted Scottish rite of Masonry includes a chapter Rose Croix, coming from the French tradition that claims to be Scottish, that offers degrees numbered 15 through 18 in their system. And this is, in some sort of way, part of the Rosicrucian tradition. I don't belong to this order, so
That's all
I'm incapable of offering greater detail, and I don't need to be called out by the guys that I know who do belong to this order, who hopefully listen to the show.
Hi, Preston's Freemason friends.
A little while later, around 1866, give or take a year, Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia. The English Rosicrucian Society.
Well, wow. Why didn't they write that in English?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Because everything sounds better when you make it sound older.
Right.
So the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia was established in England. And while they're not technically a Masonic group, which is a weird technicality, you do have to be a Master Mason to join this organization. But they're not formally recognized or officially connected to any Grand Lodge. So they just exist and require that their members are Masons. They've got a bunch of their stuff in the Masonic Museum in England on loan. That there's good relationships. It's not like they're super secretive. It's just that they're not overtly connected.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of weird technicality stuff. They investigate the meaning and symbolism of all that now remains of the wisdom, art, and literature of the ancient world, which feels to me like a pretty worthwhile pursuit. Just that's what we do. We try to understand the stuff that's gone before and maybe see how it affects how people behave today.
All right.
So Rosicrucian tradition has found its way into Masonry and exists in dozens of organizations outside of Masonry as well.
There you go. Around 1887, a few members of the SRIA, the Scottish... Nope.
Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia.
Thank you.
I don't know for sure I said that right, but we'll go with it.
But you said it, and I didn't. So they created the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn.
So this one actually didn't last that long.
I thought it lasted quite a long time.
They had splinter groups that lasted.
Yeah, Rosicrucian Fellowship came from them, and they started in 1909.
Sure.
I guess 1887 to 1909 is not that long.
It's
it just
not.
feels long. So the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and preserving the philosophy but welcoming Freemasons, and even more boldly, non-Christians and women.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Kabbalah Center.
Kabbalah, yeah.
It broke it open to the public.
Because they probably wanted to make money.
That's usually the motivation. Every now and then, it's about bettering humanity by breaking down barriers. Kind of like what we do. So very often, it's about the money.
Yeah. So the Golden Dawn saw several splinter groups, one we'll talk about in a minute, and lasted 15 years before disbanding in 1903. Arthur Edward White and Pamela Coleman Smith, both members of the Golden Dawn, are responsible for the world's most well-known tarot deck, published by William Ryder and Son in 1909. Is it pretty?
Do you know much about tarot?
I've done tarot before,
Okay.
but I don't know anything about this particular deck.
It's a cool style. It's in the public domain now, so it's very accessible. Usually it's called the Rider-Waite deck. For far too long, we just ignored the artist, probably because she's a woman. Instead, we get the dude who designed the cards and the publisher. Yeah,
and I Googled it for my own curiosity. So you can find Rider Waite-Smith. Some of them are just called Waite-Smith now, and then Rider-Smith or just the Rider tarot deck. Interesting.
Yeah, just name the publisher and leave out the names of the people who did the real work.
No.
Yeah, so roses and crosses figure prominently in the original deck.
Neat.
Yeah.
So what does Rosicrucianism look like today? Because that's really all we have. It's this weird sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Not resurgence. Revival of something that never existed.
Yeah. Basically. Revival is an interesting word because the way it was built was meant to look like a revival.
The first time around. Yeah. In the 1600s.
Yeah.
But even today, it's a revival of a revival.
Kind of. Yeah.
Neo-Rosicrucianism.
Yeah, there's a couple of dozen fairly large societies, and I'm sure there's loads more little ones that aren't getting a whole lot of attention. There's one that's still around that dates to before 1800, which is kind of cool.
It is. They all have their own websites. They all have their own Wikipedia pages. The differences are nuanced. Some of them are just as different as this one operates out of Sao Paulo. So we're not going to break down the...
Yeah, and sometimes the splits are just about breakdown of leadership. Oh, I don't like Jeff. We're starting our own party over here.
Yeah, I pulled up all of them on Wikipedia, and some were like, a Rosicrucian society out of Sao Paulo. And that was all it said. And I was like, well...
This article is a stub. You can help by expanding.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk about it because all I would say is there's a Rosicrucian society in Sao Paulo. There, I said it. Fucking done. So there's two main ones. AMORC, or the Ancient and Mystical Order of Rosae Crucis.
Well done.
Thank you. Was established in 1915. You can join for $150 a year. They do operate in Canada, United States, and the Caribbean.
Their website, kind of cool. It gives a list of all of the councils. There's different titles based on the size of the group. I like the word council as a generic catch-all. There's a whole bunch in the United States. That makes sense. A small handful in Canada, a bunch in Ontario. Our closest is in Calgary. They meet on Wednesdays.
All right. Maybe one day, if we're feeling brave.
Yeah.
To meet some... No, I'm not going to say it.
Rosicrucians.
To meet some Rosicrucians.
And there's a small handful in the Caribbean as well.
Strange,
Yeah.
but I'm into it. Rosicrucian Park is a massive headquarters campus in San Jose with an Egyptian temple, a planetarium, a meditation labyrinth, several gardens, a great library, and their main temple.
The pictures are really cool. I kind of want to visit.
Okay.
Just because it looks like a cool place to hang out.
All right, well, next time we go to Cali.
Right? And their dues, $150 a year, American.
It's like 700 Canadian dollars is our exchange rate right now, but holy shit.
I haven't checked what our exchange rate is.
It was
in a
like
while.
1.4
It makes me
last
sad
I checked.
sometimes.
Oh god, it's awful.
1.4 is not good.
No, it's not. Remember when it used to be on par?
Remember when
old.
our dollar was better than theirs?
Vaguely. It didn't ever get that high.
The end of high school was a good time.
That's when I worked. One time it was on par. I worked at the bank, and I had people who had property in the States, because you do when you live in a place as cold as this.
Mm-hmm.
They'd come in on the days that the Canadian dollar was just a little bit higher than the US dollar and transfer a bunch of money over.
Sure. Speculating on the money market is just wild.
Yeah. Anyway.
And the Rosicrucian Fellowship. I had to do a little bit of digging on this one. Their website, I did not love.
No.
It's not nearly as pretty as AMORC's.
No.
But it's decently detailed. It's just not pretty or wieldy.
No, there's something about these new age websites. They all need web designers.
Yeah, they do. So the Rosicrucian Fellowship was founded in 1909 in New York City. And this organization, still around, functioning website, was founded by a fellow named Max Heindel, who, like so many guys before him, just reworked things to fit with his view of the world and the universe.
This one actually the origin sounded a lot like the Kabbalah Center that we talked about last episode.
Yeah.
This one, as far as I can tell, doesn't have any money issues.
No scandals.
No scandals.
I went looking for Rosicrucian scandals. I didn't find any.
That's
And
good.
I think that is a great thing.
Well, if you're part of some weird Rosicrucian sex trafficking thing, please contact us.
Yeah.
First, call your authorities, and then contact us and let us know.
Priorities.
Yeah.
So some interesting teachings that make the Rosicrucian Fellowship different from a lot of others, not necessarily all others, because, varieties. They encourage vegetarianism, and they are teetotalers. No tobacco, no alcohol. Just keep your body as clean as possible, because that's a reflection of your spirit. They've also got a little bit of attention with faith healing, but, as far as scandals go, that's actually not really that big a deal. It's a little annoying. Oh well. Another thing that they teach, and I think it's really interesting, and very, very unpopular with mainstream Christianity, is this idea that there's a family tree of gods. A whole bunch of tiers that, in theory, there's thousands upon thousands of gods. And the way they're tiered, they're matched up with astrological constellations and signs. So it's unfortunately focused on the firmament hypothesis of the heavens, with all these domes that move around within each other.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the Sailor Scouts?
The icons, I think some of
It's
them.
the Sailor Scouts. Fuck yeah.
I don't, because I'm not looking at the picture. I feel like they were all of the star signs that you see when you go look at your horoscope, rather than the planets.
Oh, okay.
Because we know the planets are the things. They have their own meaning too.
Right.
Their symbols are used
Right.
for things, but
Just got really excited by the potential origins of the Sailor Scouts.
so the god of our solar system is just the god of our solar system, and then
There's other ones. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm
and
into that.
what the thing that I think is really interesting about that is the way that it's mapped out with a little bit of creativity could map onto the massive cosmological structures that we're now realizing that, like we've got superclusters of galaxies that are kind of on a branch, not connected, but like there's a flow to
Right.
the whole universe that could be mapped onto this cosmology.
I feel very small right now.
Right? The
Just
universe
had a-
is too big.
I know. I just had a mild existential crisis while you were talking. I was like, none of this matters.
It's a tough place to be. And to think 500 years ago, it was normal to think that the earth was the center of everything. There was nothing beyond, and we had hard, solid domes revolving around us, and that's where the lights came through.
I kind of like that better. It feels a little more comforting.
It's a lot more... It makes it feel like we're more important.
Yep.
And that's a lot... I would say generally a more positive thing than feeling like you just don't matter.
And with that happy note, any final thoughts on Rosicrucian? Or nihilism?
Nihilism is easy,
Yeah.
for sure. I like the language of symbolism when trying to convey meaning about life and the universe.
Yeah, I like that too. I think it's interesting how it all comes down to the same symbols, but we'll explore more of that next week.
It is interesting that we came up with symbols thousands of years ago to mark in shorthand, basically, the things we see in the sky. And now it's a thing that we just all agree on, that these symbols are used to describe these things, and they map onto other things that really matter. It's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
If you decide that they matter.
Yeah, and that's where I'm like, is it because that's, again, like the lowest common denominator, or because we're not creative to think of anything different? Like, are we at the expanses of the human mind?
We have done, by we people, have done some creative things with old symbols, but I don't feel like we've shown a whole lot of need from new symbols, I guess.
I guess so.
If you look at, why is the word gone? If you look at the Necronomicon,
Mm-hmm.
somebody put a lot of work into coming up with new kinds of symbols for these old gods and ancient ones and whatever. And because they're so complex in their shape, they never really catch on.
Right. Fair. All right. Well, things to mull between now and next episode.
Right?
You know what else you can do between now and next episode, Preston?
Buy some church merch.
Wow. You went right for the hard sell. Yes. Go spend all your money on Patreon to support this podcast. On Patreon. Yeah, spend all your money on Patreon. That's not what Preston was talking about, though. Patreon subscribers, ongoing support, amazing. Spread shop, buy some church merch. Or if you don't want to spend any money, Boo.
and just follow us.
I was going to boo on you, but you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Discord, and YouTube.
Yeah,
And we'll post some pictures from this episode in Discord.
absolutely. Help curate this library.
Right.
Thanks for joining us.
Peace be with you.
By the late Middle Ages, the Christian prophecy had fulfilled itself.
God is near.